first major change in medicine comes during a period of time we call the Renaissance. It's the part of history that starts around 1450 and lasts into the 1600s. Renaissance is an Italian word that means a rebirth of interest in the knowledge of the ancients, and this means the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire meant that all that knowledge had been lost, but the Eastern Roman Empire had survived and was called the Byzantine Empire. But by the 1450s, the Turks were invading from the south. Refugees fled to Italy and took their books with them. In Italy, these books were translated and printed on the newly invented printing press. We had all the lost copies of Galen. We even rediscovered how to make cement and build domes. The printing press was responsible for a massive change in the world. Anyone could own a press and print in any language. This took control of knowledge away from the church. Universities had their own printing presses, and they could decide now what knowledge was acceptable. Another reason for change was down to the actions of a German monk called Martin Luther. We call the movement he started the Reformation, as he wanted to reform the Catholic Church. In 1521 he started the Protestant Church because he and his followers were protesting against a lack of reform. Luther told his Christian followers that they had to find their own answers to their questions by reading the Bible. Finding answers to questions is the start of the scientific method, and reading the Bible meant, schools were needed to teach the boys to be able to read. Science became a popular hobby for the rich men who could afford to spend time doing science. In 1660, they got the approval of the king when Charles II said they could call their science club the Royal Society. Now you need to know about three key individuals. The first is Andreas Vesalius, who was the professor of anatomy at Padua University. He was allowed to dissect dead criminals to teach anatomy to students, and he realised that Galen's ideas on anatomy were wrong. He paid talented Renaissance artist Titian to draw detailed anatomical drawings that he then annotated, and in 1543 he published his book, The Fabric of the Human Body. A second physician is called William Harvey. In the early 1600s, he saw the recently invented water pump, and he was able to prove that the heart was a two-sided pump driving blood around a one-way enclosed system. He could not show that capillaries existed, and it was only after his death that these were seen under the new powerful microscopes, and his 1629 book on the motion of the heart was accepted and taught in anatomy schools. These two men did the most damage to Galen's grip on medical knowledge, but they could not supply a cause for illness. And whilst this was vital knowledge, it was of little use to the barber surgeons, as they could not stop pain, infection, or replace lost blood. The third person is Ambrose Paré, a French war surgeon in the 1500s. There were a lot of wars and a lot of injured soldiers. The old method to stop bleeding was cauterization, where they burned the ends of the arteries with a red-hot iron. Instead, Paré used silk thread to tie off the ends of the arteries. He also invented the crow's beak clamp that we still use today. Back then, they also used boiling oil, which was poured into the wounds left by musket shot, because they thought the shot carried poison. Now, during the time, he ran out of oil, and he had to go straight to the balm of egg yolk, rose oil and terps. This chance event led to more soldiers surviving. He too published his discoveries, and he published them in French. Unfortunately, the use of silk thread puts infection into the body, and it wasn't until years later, when antiseptics were invented, that this development became useful. On the downside, the English Reformation saw the closure of all the monasteries in England and Wales after 1540, and this meant that the hospitals closed too, unless a rich person could pay to keep them open, such as Henry VIII keeping St Bartholomew's open in London. Apothecaries now had books to refer to on herbal remedies, and there were new materials to play with from the New World. Barber surgeons would still have the same problems they'd had in the Middle Ages, and physicians were still expected by their paying patients to use the four humours of Galen, even if they didn't agree with Galen anymore. So here there was little change. But finally, the number and sizes of towns grew, creating a public health issue that would continue for the next 300 years. That's the Renaissance.